October 15th, 2023. Welcome to Both Sides of the Mic. And our guest caller this week is Ed Foote. And welcome, Ed, for agreeing to be in the hot seat this week.
Hot seat? It sounds like this is dangerous.
Ask Wendy and Hannah. They both went through it, and see, they survived. It frizzled Hannah's hair a little bit, but that's okay.
Wendy survives anything.
Yes, and Lars lost his hair. He had a great head of hair.
The Queen of Canada.
I'm Canadian.
Anyhow, for those people that don't know, Ed's been calling for many years, but I'm going to let him tell his own story as we go. But I always ask a question, like a first question kind of a thing, and it's usually very important. And I think I'm going to do the same with Ed that I did to Hannah. Being a caller of many years, people want to really know, like, how do you do this? What's the magic? How do you entertain the people? How do you keep all that stuff in your head and everything? So the very first question I have, Ed, would be, do you remember your first kiss?
No, but it must have been for my mother.
Yeah.
The same answer.
Hannah, you told him. That's what Hannah said.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I was looking for the lustful type.
Oh.
But that's okay. What would you rather be doing in this interview? I know you're going to say nothing.
This is the highlight of my year being with you, so there would be nothing else.
Okay, that's the answer I was going for. Just a minute, I don't have a bell, but I do have the thing that says you did the right answer. Let me just get this down here. There you go. And Ed, you win the 1962 Yugo 3-cylinder car, any color you want, as long as it's black. Okay. Are you an introvert or an extrovert, Ed?
I would say both. I've been an introvert all my life, but once I started with square dancing, I was forced to become an extrovert. So I'm an extrovert when I'm supposed to be an extrovert, which is on the stage and entertaining, and I'm an introvert when I'm not.
Yep, absolutely. Very good. What was your favorite subject in school, high school?
Probably history.
Oh, yeah.
History and geography.
If you could sit down and have a cup of coffee right now with any person from the past in history, who do you think that would be?
Joe Ubelacker.
Oh. You mean from the 17th century? Wow. Oh, Lordy. Okay.
Oh, there are a lot of people with, in history, so I've never really thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm big on tennis, played tennis all my life, so Billie Jean King would be someone I would like to, always wanted to meet her and be able to talk to her. Okay.
Well, speaking of tennis, why are tennis balls so fuzzy?
I don't know, but they say tennis, it's logical for callers to be tennis players because tennis players are loud, they're always raising a racket.
Oh.
And you should never marry a tennis player because they think love is nothing.
Oh, gee. Okay, yes, you do play tennis then.
Joe, I think you might regret asking Ed for an interview.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ed.
No, you got a point there, Wendy.
I think I'm going to count all the jokes.
Oh, look at it. It's almost 2:00. No.
By the way, thanks, Wendy, for all that information on the people dancing in Montreal. Appreciate you sending that.
No problem. Tell her to get in touch with me if she has any questions.
Yeah, I forwarded the information on. I sent it all to her mother, who then sent it to her, and now I'm waiting to hear subsequently at some point.
Okay.
Hey, Joe, just remember, recordings can be deleted.
I know, that's what I'm thinking of. I'll-
Just
Yeah, but he wouldn't do that because he's a good Joe.
That's right. Joe who? Anyhow, let's talk about your square dance, sort of a thing. What got you into square dancing, and then ultimately what led you to becoming a caller? So take it away, Ed.
Well, I got started in square dancing when I worked at Bloomingdale's department store in New York City. I was going to graduate school in Philadelphia, and it was a 2-year program. So people came in on the campus interviewing for summer internships and that kind of thing. So I worked at Bloomingdale's in the summer, stayed at a fraternity at Columbia University, and every Friday night at the student union, they had a square dance. So I went to the square dance, and that was how I got started with square dancing. And then I went back to school in Philadelphia, and I wanted to continue with square dancing in Philadelphia. So I asked the caller at the student union, how do I contact anybody in Philadelphia? He had a name, gave me this name, somebody. So I got back to Philadelphia, contact this caller, and there was a printed list of clubs in Philadelphia. And so whoever I contacted sent me this list. And so I said, fine, called up a girl for a date, went out to the square dance. And I didn't know it was Western style. I thought it was going to be like what I was doing in the student union. And all of a sudden it was all these terms. I didn't know anything. So I figured, well, I better, if I want to keep square dancing, I better learn these terms. But I didn't want to go to class. I've always considered class kind of a waste of time. If you're smart, you can learn all this stuff in a month, and then you'd have to take 8 or 9 months to go through class. So I just studied. I'd approach it like a college course. In 3 weeks, I knew all the calls. Of course, there weren't as many calls then. And just was going to square dances regularly in Philadelphia.
What year would that have been?
That was in 1964.
Yep.
The fall of 1964. And then I went home to Pittsburgh, found a list of clubs there, danced at a couple clubs there, went back to Philadelphia. And I'm hitting all the different clubs in Philadelphia. And by 1st of December, I could handle anything that they were calling there. And being young, I was looking for a challenge in the dancing. I didn't want the real easy stuff. So I could handle anything in Philadelphia. Went home for Christmas vacation, again, looking for places to dance. And because I didn't have a partner, I was dependent on having the caller's wife be available to be a partner. So I would call up the club ahead of time and say to the caller, is your wife available? And they said, yes, fine. Then I go to the dance. So I just threw a dart at a name and called up this caller, went out to the dance. His wife was available. Well, it turned out it was Pete Heckman, who at the time was the most difficult caller in the United States. Lee Cotman listened to his tapes when he was learning to call challenge. And Pete Heckman was calling all of these calls. I mean, I'd never heard of them. But I'm only dancing like 6 weeks. So I said, this must be the really way square dancing is. So I better learn all these calls. So over Christmas vacation, I'm studying like a college course to learn all these calls. He's calling 3 times a week at different places. So I'm going all the dances. And then by the time I got done with Christmas vacation, went back to school, I was able to I'd worked my way up about halfway through his ability-wise in his group. His group accepted me because they saw I was studying and everything. So I was kind of like in the middle of his group ability-wise. So I go back to Philadelphia. Well, there was a couple from Pete Heckman's group in Pittsburgh that had moved to Long Island, New York. And Pete Heckman would send them audio tapes every week, and they would dance them in their basement on Saturday night. So they gave me this couple's name. And I called them up and I said, can I come to your dance? They said, sure. And once they knew I was dancing to Pete Heckman and could handle the material. So I started doing that. In the second half, in my second semester of the second year in graduate school, I started commuting to New York City every weekend to dance. And of course, this couple immediately told me about Lee Cotman, who was calling, and he was calling on Friday night. So that was great. I would commute up to Long Island, dance at Lee Cotman on Friday night, Pete Heckman to tapes on Saturday night, and then drive back to Philadelphia on Sunday. And I did that for the whole second half of my second year at graduate school. And there was another caller there called Paul Hunt. And Paul Hunt, he had the same style as Lee Cotman. And Lee Cotman learned from Paul Hunt also. Lee Cotman and Paul Hunt are the only callers I've ever heard who call on the upbeat. They called on the upbeat. The whole world calls on the downbeat, but they called on the upbeat. So when you danced to Paul Hunt, it was like you were on a hydrofoil suspended on air 6 inches over the floor, and you're just sailing along. It was just unbelievable. And I found out later, so then I would commute up to dance to him on Tuesday night. So I'd drive to Long Island, dance to Paul Hunt on Tuesday night, drive back after the dance, and then go back to Long Island on the weekend. I found out later that Paul Hunt was so impressed that someone from Philadelphia would drive up for his dance on a Tuesday night that he would always call harder when I was there, and the dancers all liked it when I was there because then he would call harder. So that was it. So then I'm dancing there, and he said, "Well, I want to see about square dancing someplace else." And somebody said, "Well, the Washington, D.C. Spring Festival." And of course, this is all challenge dancing that I'm doing. And the dancer said, "You don't want to go there. It's all real easy, real low level. You're not going to have a good time there." And I said, "Yeah, but I want to see more than 7 squares on the floor." So the convention was at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington, D.C., 4,500 dancers. And I went, had a great time, just wonderful. So I said, "Great, I want to go to another festival. I'll go anywhere." They had flyers sitting out there. Toronto, Canada, Spring Festival, first weekend of May. Fine, I'll go. So at the bottom of the form, it said, "Check here if you're a caller." Now, I didn't know what this meant because I'm only dancing 4 or 5 months. And I'm still studying maybe an hour before each dance, reviewing all the calls because we're doing 200-300 calls. So I figured if I check this box, maybe they'll send me some free literature on how to do the latest calls. So I checked off the box, sent it back. They wrote back, said, "You're on the program. Have 20 minutes of material ready." And this was 3 weeks before the convention. I didn't know that at that time, anybody that said they were a caller, these big festivals had a little room off to the side, and they'd stick any caller in there for 10 or 20 minutes just to give them a little exposure and a little practice. Well, I didn't know this. They said, "Have 20 minutes of material ready." And this was 3 weeks before the event. So I figured, well, if I'm on the program, then I better learn how to call. So I got some sets in order material and copied some stuff down. And Lee Cotman gave me some material, and Pete Heckman gave me some material, and wrote it all down and went up there and called. And Lee Cotman let me practice in his basement a couple times ahead of time just to practice a little bit. And Pete Heckman let me practice in Pittsburgh when I came back for Easter vacation. And went up and called, and they said when I came off the mic, I looked a little white, but that was it. So then I said, well, I survived this. I didn't die. After parties at the Toronto convention. Yeah, I'll sign up. And of course, they'll take anybody, and you just call in the order they give you. And I decided, well, I would use some Lee Cotman material for this. And I told Lee, write me some easy material. This is a big festival. I gotta have easy stuff. Don't worry about it. I get up there, start calling his material. They're dropping like flies. And I thought, gee, there's nothing to this calling. I can break the floor down anytime I want. So I continued, and that was it. So I just continued with the calling and graduated from graduate school, came back to Pittsburgh, got a job, and started started calling, and I was still going to Pete Heckman. I didn't have a club or anything, just calling. And I called my first dance where I was hired at a club over in Steubenville, Ohio, which is right over the border from Pennsylvania, in December of 1965. And that was my first club booking. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah. It kind of makes me wonder, anybody that learns to dance that quickly and can just read the rules and do it, many times thinks everybody learns that way or can learn that way. And as such, when they teach, they don't teach all that well, because they say, well, here's how you spin the top, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now you should be able to dance that from any position, anywhere, no matter what, because I just told you the rules. So how, since you did learn your dance calls and whatnot by basically reading, how was your first teaching situations?
Well, I've twofold. Number one, I recognize that not everybody learns as fast, so I'm constantly disappointed, but that's just the way it is. But number two, I want everything as simple as possible. I want all rules as unbelievably simple as possible, whether it's definitions of calls, whether it's how to call, whether it's how to sight call or do anything. I want everything simple. So in teaching new people, I remember this, and I say, if I'm a brand new dancer, how would I like to have this given to me? And I'm always asking myself that question. So I don't have any problem, never had any problem with teaching, because I would always apply that rule. And the fact that I was disappointed he didn't pick it up as fast as I did, I never showed it.
Oh. Yeah, that's good. That's exactly the way I would hope most callers would handle it. I think most callers are in the same category as most dancers. They really have to do it a number of times in various formations before they really catch on. So that I'm much like you, where I can read the rule and then I can dance it.
I just heard it. I was listening to a Caller Lab tape today, because when you're a Call Lab, you don't have time to get to all the panels. So there was a panel of longtime callers, and Kip Garvey was talking. And he said he had done a survey a number of years ago, and he and Jerry Junk were on the same page with this. They said that over 60% of all callers either call by memory or by reading. And I am just shocked by this statistic that it's that high. I would never have thought it was that high. It makes me think maybe I'm not living in the real world if that statistic is true, because all the callers I've seen don't do that. Now, of course, they're counting callers that only do party dances. And so they have everything memorized for their party dances, that kind of thing. But I just find that statistic very high. We're kind of off the interview subject here, but I just thought I'd toss that in because I'd never heard that statistic, and I'm shocked that it's that high.
Well, I'll ask Kip. Kip's going to be doing an interview. I'm not. We haven't picked a date yet, but that's one of the things I'll try to remember to ask him. I would say that that's true. Like out here in Alberta, I've done a number of caller workshops and clinics now, and I'm finding that most of the experienced callers that come to the workshops read their material, or they use memorized modules, and they don't even go from known formation to known formation. They just have the whole thing memorized, or they read like tremendously. And
I've never understood. I don't. That doesn't compute with me, because if somebody memorizes a whole slew of modules And the sight calling formulas are so simple.
Yeah.
They're only like 6 steps and you got it.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't these callers want to do sight calling? Because it's simpler, far simpler than memorizing all these modules. And yet they don't do it. So I've never understood that.
Yeah. Well, for those callers, I think, they're sort of the average caller that has, most of the ones that I've met so far, they have other jobs. In fact, there's nobody like us who are full-time callers anymore.
Well, the fact they have a job, I would think they would want to sight call more, because now they don't have to memorize all this stuff and spend all this time studying things. They can just sight call. So I would think somebody working full-time would love to sight call.
Well, I think they write a lot of material, and unfortunately, a lot of them use terminations. They write it out so that they know it works. It doesn't always flow very well. It's just something we have to try to work at as caller mentor coaches, to try to enlighten the folks that sight calling. And, I would call it controlled sight calling. It isn't just like, well, you pick up the mic and just call anything you want. No, you still have to plan things.
Right.
You have it in your head. I want to get to this point with the dance. Here's by tip 3, I want to be doing curly across the top, just not using those words. Working them into that, and then floating towards the end of the dance.
Of course, it's interesting to me, having worked with a lot of new callers. I see callers that have been calling 2, 3, 4 years, and they're trying to sight call, and they'll call star through when 2 boys are facing each other. Or they can't recognize that a couple is half sashayed. I mean, your eyes are open and you're looking at them and you can tell the difference of people. So that doesn't compute with me. And so because of that, maybe that's why so many people read and memorize, because they can't tell the difference of sexes when they're looking at the square.
I think a good training ground for any caller would be to call for a gay group.
I love calling for the gay groups.
I mean,
I love sight calling for the gay groups.
Oh, yeah.
Because, well, number one, the gay groups are really good. They dance much better than the average straight club. But I love going into Seattle and calling for the gay groups there and sight calling. And they told me in Seattle, after I'd been there 2 or 3 times, they told me that there was a top caller from the U.S. that would go into Seattle, and he would request that he had to have a quote normal square down front for him to sight call on, and that just lowered their opinion of him in their eyes. And I look on it as a challenge. I'm right back to dancing challenge with Pete Heckman and Lee Cobb. If I can sight call to a square with 6 women and 2 men, and 2 of the women are men, or they're half sashayed, or the man really isn't a man. I think it's fun. It's a challenge for me.
Yeah. It takes, you really got to be able to have a good memory to know or remember who your corner is. That's for sure, and who's dancing with who. This is where some of the systems work quite well. Like Don Beck's mental image, but I find that any caller using those methods usually doesn't call difficult enough for the gay population, or for
I would think they might not call difficult enough for the straight population.
Well,
I mean, Don Beck can use his system great.
Yeah.
And it's a good, I love it as a tool for new callers. Can they follow in their mind?
Yeah.
But eventually, to call a whole normal dance this way, I couldn't do it.
No, it's.
So I find it as a good intellectual training exercise.
Yeah. It is. It's a good sort of a thing. But anyhow, it's getting onto that subject, outside calling and keeping track of dances and all. you mentioned offline that probably the most embarrassing times you've had have been when you miss a corner.
Right. I tell everybody at a dance when I'm calling, everybody is allowed 3 mistakes a night. You, as the dancers, are allowed 3 mistakes, and I'm allowed 3. So if I miss my corner, I say, fine, that's my first mistake tonight. So the score is 15-1. And so I'll allow myself 3 mistakes a night, but no more. I don't want number 4, and preferably not even up to 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, if I do miss the corner, then I tell them, well, it's not my fault. You squared up wrong.
That's one way of doing it.
I say that all the time.
Well, that's the reason, though. If you can recognize that you've hit the wrong corner before they've promenaded home and quit, it gives you the opportunity to work up different little scenarios of get outs that fixes your error before they promenade home.
And I don't have very, I've written a few of those down to some point, but I have very few of those because I don't make mistakes. I don't allow myself to miss the corner.
Yeah.
And so if I miss the corner, that's a trauma. So I want to get out of this as fast as possible. So I'll do 2 or 3, go get them out, get them squared back up and get going again so they can forget this experience.
Well, my problem is I might remember your corner, but it's the corner you had 3 tips ago. You know, and it's not the corner you have now. So I give you the wrong corner. Well, I don't want, you know, Marshall Flip had a great one that he used. It was rather lengthy, but he'd then dance you around until you were facing not your corner. He'd say, "Is that your corner?" Everybody would go, "No." Then he'd dance you around and get a little more uptight and say, "Is that your corner?" And he'd go, "No." So finally, when they got to the corner, he said, "Is that your corner?" And he, "Yes." And then he'd say, "Dose a do" or something, you know. And people get, you know, it's fun for them. I mean, they recognize that, well, you screwed up, you know, and this is how you fix it. And we got to laugh at each other.
See that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a fun thing for like maybe once a night or something.
Oh, yeah. Just
for me, psychology plays a big part. So I want to give people a reward, a carrot on the stick, at least once every 45 seconds to an Alaman left or right and left grand or a revolve or something like that.
Yeah.
So if I've missed the corner and it takes me a long time to get to the true corner, the dancers are saying, the dancers feel like it's a downer, that we want to get going again, get going, go for our corner, and you're working away here, and we know you missed it the first time. And so to me, I interpret this as just a psychological downer, and I want to get them out of this as fast as possible and get going again.
Yeah. Well, with Marshall, you know, that was a shtick thing, you know,
Right.
It's a routine. Right. It's like you say, once even a month of a thing like that is plenty. And people recognize it for what it is. But callers that will just keep calling back and forth, you know, and their corner passes them on going on the other side of the set, that kind of a thing. Yeah, that drives me a little bit batty. I say, yeah, just do it, you know, get it, fix it. You know how to do it. You're a caller. So
to me, as a caller, you're not allowed to miss the corner. That's your job up there, is to get the corner, get the square, right, left hand correctly and everything. So if you're missing it, you're not doing your job, and that doesn't fly with me.
Yeah, you need to know your stuff better. So for challenge level, you don't cite all your challenge levels, do you?
Well, there's a long time formula in challenge when you and I were back at the convention. I don't know whether it holds true anymore, but for a general average group, I would say average in the different levels of challenge. At C1, you sight call 75% and you read 25%. At C2, you read 50 and you sight call 50. C3A, you're reading 90%. But for a very relaxed C3A group, you might sight call 25, or you might sight call 75%. So it depends. For a real top super C1 group, then you might read 75%. So it all depends. I have no problem sight calling for C1 and C2, but I got all the cards there prepared. I'll go back and forth, or I'll glance down at a card, see a theme, and then I'll sight call the theme. And then maybe 3 or 4 sequences down the road, then I'll read the card.
Mm-hmm.
That's a typical way to do it at challenge. At advanced, of course, it's basically all sight calling unless you have a super advanced group. So I'm always prepared on an advanced group to have prepared material, but oftentimes they're not good enough to even go there. Written prepared material is always harder than sight calling. So you have to know that going in and not use that material unless the group proves that they are worthy to receive it.
There are so many things that I remember from our challenge conventions that John Sabowski was reading. It was a C1 hall, and he's calling his heart out and all, and after a few minutes, someone said, they yell out, "Go to the cards," and he said, "These are the cards." He was already on the hard stuff. They wanted more. Yeah,
that's the most frustrating thing as a challenge caller. If you're calling as hard as you can at whatever level,
yeah,
and everybody's just coasting right through it.
Yeah.
That's a real downer.
That's for sure. Although sometimes too much information is a problem. When I went down to Florida the first time, way back in the late 80s, I had a C4 group, and we had, I think we had somewhere around 5, 6, 7 squares dancing C4, because everybody migrated down there, to the seagulls and that sort of thing. Right. And the first thing out of my mouth was a head swap around. Well, they did a split swap, they did a reverse split swap, they did every swap they could think of, other than the basic swap around. And when they finally figured out what they were doing, they had a good chuckle about it. So sometimes it's overkill.
Well, then you can say the score is 8-0, 8-0.
Yeah, right.
So you've already used up your allotment for this dance, and you're into the next dance.
Yes, yeah, right. I don't have to show up. Just send me your money.
Right.
Do you like to cook?
No, I've never been a good cook. I can do scrambled eggs and popcorn, and that's about it. I've never been into cooking.
Okay, so I guess if we share a room, I have to cook. Oh man, that I always figured for my kids I had to teach them cooking things, like they know how to make great peanut butter sandwiches and tomato soup from the can. The important stuff in life. How about pets? Got any pets?
We had a dog for 17 years.
Wow. And
the dog died, and we didn't get another one because my wife Marilyn's parents, they were taking care of the dog when we would travel. We were traveling all the time. So then they moved into a senior center where they couldn't really take care of a pet. So when our dog died, we didn't get another one because they were no longer able to take care of it. And we're still traveling all over the place. We definitely didn't want to put the dog in a kennel, so we just never got another pet.
What was this?
Growing up, I did have a pet goldfish.
And what happened to the goldfish?
It died. That was it.
Supper, yeah, I know. Okay, so much for the cooking. What was your dog's name?
Sparkle.
Sparkle.
Here's an interesting historical note for those that call challenge or dance challenge. So Wendy and Eva, Joe, way back when Norm Poisson, who was a top caller from Massachusetts, does he still call at all? I think he may be still calling. He showed up at Call Lab a couple years ago. Anyway, he wrote a call, and he wanted to honor my dog's name. So he calls me up and says, I wrote this call. Here's what you do. And the call is Scoot and Ramble. And he said, I want to call this Scoot and Sparkle. And I said, no, even though I would like my dog's name to be honored, I don't think that has the same ring as Ramble. And I gave him the term Ramble. And I said, this sounds better. Go with Scoot and Ramble. So we went with it. And that's how that call got written and is on the list and got named. He wrote it for my dog, but I deleted my dog and went for Ramble.
Well, if you get another dog, name it Ramble.
I guess I could do that. Yeah.
Have you written any calls?
Yeah, but they never went anywhere. What are the calls? If you have a Burleson, there's a call in there, Columbine.
Oh yeah.
And I wrote that, but it never went anywhere. And what else? What else? Oh, I know what I wrote. I wrote swing chain through, which is a spin chain through, but all 3/4 turns are quarter turns. And I wrote that, but nobody knows that. And then there was another thing that I wrote, I half wrote, I forget the name of that call. The call I was most proud of that never went anywhere was a challenge call called quads. And you divide the square into 4 quadrants. You just draw a vertical line and a horizontal line. You got the 4 quadrants. So quad 1 is the square that is the section that has girl 1 and boy 2. And quad 2 has girl 2 and boy 3, etc. And so then you would call in quad 1 do this, and quad 2 do this, etc., etc., etc. I thought this was a great challenge call, but the established challenge callers at the time, which were Kopman and Hodson, they never picked it up, and so therefore it never went anywhere. But I always liked quads.
Interesting.
So there's none of my calls. Can't think of. There was one more call I co-wrote with somebody, but I forget what that was. So there's so many calls. It was like the world didn't need me to write calls.
Yeah. I only wrote calls that were useful to me to get into a different formation quickly, or to emphasize certain calls. Like, people didn't used to cast off 3/4 very well. And that was when there was a difference between cast and cast off. So I wrote a call that, and I like to use names that people would do even if they didn't know the call. So from a quarter tag, the people facing would pass through. The outsides would trade and roll. The 2-face line that resulted in the middle would do a cast off 3/4. And it flowed quite nicely. And
what did you call that?
Make a pass. And everybody could do it, whether they knew the call or not. They could make a pass.
And what was that C3 call that had the word pass in it that was dumb because it said, do this, and so you don't do it? What was it? It had the word pass in it. I forget what that was. That was way back.
Oh my.
It had the word pass in it. So if you give the name of the call, it means you don't do it. Which is
I like that already.
Just dumb.
Well, we could say pass the third part or something. I don't know.
It was on the C3 list. I think it was on C3B back in the 90s or whatever. And
doesn't ring a bell. I'll be darned.
I don't know.
Anyhow.
Oh, you use my favorite phrase again.
Oh, there you are. Yes. Did you all get that? What's his favorite phrase? I'll be darned. And y'all know why. Says, raise your hand if you don't understand.
I think they were all here when I explained that at the start.
Okay,
Wendy, you weren't here?
I think so.
My favorite phrase is "I'll be darned," because darn is what you do to a sock, and a sock goes on a foot.
Okay.
Wendy wonders why. We can't hear you, Wendy. Are you muted or?
I just
she's
said
muted.
grown.
Oh. Wendy wonders now whether it was a good decision to tune into this thing.
Yeah, right.
Actually, I'm impressed. You've actually held back. There haven't been too many groaners. I know I shouldn't have said anything. Now they're going to come fast and furious. I know.
Oh, who, me?
Yeah, who you?
Funny, when he said that, I thought, bada boom.
Yeah, one of my tennis players says that all the time when I tell him, well, one of the greatest things that's happened to me is that when Buddy Weaver bought American Square Dance magazine, and I suggested to him about a year and a half ago that to increase circulation of his magazine, he should establish the Ed Foote joke of the month. And he did this. And so every month there's the Ed Foote joke of the month. And his circulation has increased.
By how much?
I don't know. He didn't tell me.
This much. Well, when you play on your name, sort of a thing, I did that at the Advanced and Challenge Convention in Toledo one year. We have the call Locker's Choice. So I introduced a new call called Yuba, and I told them how to do Yuba. So a little later during that particular first tip, then I put it together and I said, do Yuba Locker's Choice.
That would be interesting. If you went to Yuba City, California and told them your name, you could pass yourself off as one of the founders there.
Yeah, that's right.
I get a lot of mileage out of my name. I tell everybody I put my soul into my work, so nobody can call me a heel because I toe the line, and then I make no arch enemies.
Oh my gosh! And being imperial measurements, your kids would be inches.
Well, no, I've always said that if the United States does what Canada has done and adopts the metric system, then I'll be known as Ed Meter.
Or a third of a meter. Yeah. Okay. So what's the title of your autobiography going to be?
I'm not going to write it because nobody will buy it.
Oh, I don't know about that. But it's still an autobiography.
Yeah, it takes so much effort to write a book that I haven't considered it. It takes so long and so much work, and I'm got a lot of irons in the fire, so nobody would be that interested anyway, so I'm not planning to do an autobiography.
You're just saying you're lazy. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
But Ed, if you were to write an autobiography, I know chances are it's not going to happen, but if you were, what would you call it? Foot by foot.
Footloose.
Footloose. There you go. See, that wasn't so hard.
The footloose collar.
Footloose collar.
The footloose collar.
Good.
Okay. We'll keep you to it. So what makes you smile or laugh, Ed?
Good jokes.
Good jokes. Well, now that you're
I like to go on YouTube and listen to old excerpts of Rodney Dangerfield, Don Nichols, Johnny Carson excerpts, and there are tons of these things on YouTube. And who's the puppet guy?
Oh yeah. Watch him all the time.
I can't think of his name now. He has this puppet shows. He's on Ahmed the Dead Terrorist and all that.
Oh yeah. Jeff
Dunham. Jeff Dunham is just a riot.
Isn't he?
Just a riot. I can listen to his same programs over and over again.
Well, I have a hope, because I don't remember jokes well, and I don't tell jokes well. I have a whole page, and some of them are like I told my wife she should embrace her mistakes, so she hugged me.
But I thought you weren't married. Were you married now?
Oh, I've been married for over 50 years, not in a row. But
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
yeah. Oh yes, I thought everybody knew that. Um,
Oh, I wasn't sure you got remarried. Okay.
Trivia question: does anybody on the screen here know where I was married last?
Probably when you were in the other room of your house.
No, that was
That's
2
where you were
marriages
married
ago.
last. Now you're married here, but when you were in the other room, that's where you were last married.
That's true. No, hot air balloon, Middlefield, Ohio, not too far from Pennsylvania. Um,
So you say you're an angel because you're always up in the air about something?
that's true. One of mine is I thought growing old would take longer. Okay. That's why I don't tell jokes. Now, in fact, before we go on any further, give us a couple of good jokes there, Ed. You're calling away and something has sparked your mind to tell us a joke.
Well, I just sold my homing pigeon on eBay for the 23rd time.
Oh, gee.
Oh,
I joined the Scarecrow Society. They welcomed me with open arms.
Oh, gee. Oh. How many people do not get those jokes?
They all get them. There's a handful of people that don't laugh. And of course, for them, then I never tell them any more jokes because pearls before swine, you know. So, but what a lot of people will say, because a lot of my jokes are puns, and so a lot of people say, don't laugh because you'll only encourage them. But the problem is the jokes are so good, people can't help themselves. They have to laugh anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Well, one of the
At one
phrases,
time in my life, I tried running a taxi business, but I found I was just driving people away.
one of the phrases I remember most when I first danced to you was, "It's a pleasure to watch you dance."
Right. And I stole that from Lee Cotman. Lee Cotman is the originator of that. Everybody thinks I originated it, but I actually stole it from him because he was using that right when I first started calling to him. And then he dropped it and I picked it up and I've just used it ever since.
So, have you had a best gig, a best dance that you really stands out in your mind?
Yes, anything in Canada.
Oh, okay. Must have been over at Wendy's house.
Yeah, I say, and how many times has that been, Ed? Do you call in Canada much?
No, because all the border crossing stuff.
Yeah.
I used to call in Canada. I used to call in Toronto every year, called in Kingston every year. And then I just got such to be a border hassle. I said, forget this. So after one of the things I always remembered was I was calling in Ottawa in 1976 and listened to Jimmy Carter win the presidential election while I was in Ottawa in the motel room. So listening to a presidential election from another country was an interesting experience. So I've called across Canada, but it was all before this border crossing stuff. I did a tour one year where I flew to Manitoba, called there. Then I flew to Alberta, called there. And then to Regina and called there, and then to Vancouver and Victoria, British Columbia, and just made a string, just flew from one city to the next and called a couple dances each place. And then I called 2 or 3 years in a row in New Brunswick way back when. And that was it. So I've called in 7 Canadian provinces. But the last time I called was in Toronto. I think Jimmy Lee brought me in. And that was for his club is it Jimmy Lee? Do I have the right name?
Yes, yeah.
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 And that was in like 1995. It's such a hassle. You gotta get a work permit, and then you stop at the border, and I gotta check your work, and all this hassle. And I said, it's not worth it. And then, unfortunately, the United States gives Canadian colors more of a hassle than Canada gives U.S. colors.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I just dropped the whole thing. I just don't even consider Canada anymore because of that.
Okay.
Actually, it's not hard to come to Canada to call. There's a special allowance for callers that come to Canada to call, as long as you're not calling in a bar, or like if it's a community thing, they call it consider a community thing. No problem.
I've never heard that. You don't have to get a work permit?
Nope.
No.
Because it was always, the work permit was the big thing.
No, you didn't have to. You could, like the one in Prescott. They would always send me a visa thing. I forget what it was.
Right.
And I think it cost them $75 or something for it, but they didn't have to. And the funny thing was, the last time I went up there to call, I was living in New York at the time. I got to the border about 5 in the morning or so, and they pulled me over and they said, we're going to have to get the boss. So Sunday morning we were waiting for the boss, whatever, customs, and this guy shows up in a 3-piece outfit. He's dressed so he's probably making $1,000 an hour because he's the boss and it's off time. So we go into his office and he pulls out this big book, really thick. He goes, lump, opens it up. Then he goes, let's see. So you say you're a square dance caller. So he's on the S's in his book, like a dictionary. And he's going down the line there. And he says, let's see, seals. You don't work with seals or anything, do you? No. Da, da, da. And he gets down farther. He goes, he said, a strip. You keep your clothes on when you call? I said, yeah. And then he goes, boink, with a book. He says, well, I guess that's it. And I'm thinking, oh man, he's not going to let me in, even though I got this piece of paper. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, we can't classify you. I said, does that mean I can't come in? He said, no, you just unclassified. Goodbye. So
I always thought you were pretty classy myself.
yeah, right. But when I ran the campground down in New York and hired callers from Canada, it was quite a messy affair. We had advertising.
Just awful. Just awful.
We had to advertise in different theatrical magazines, whatever, you name it. And it cost a bunch of money and a bunch of time going here and there, getting the right papers. So
for decades, I follow one rule. I want no stress. So if something gives me stress, forget it. Missing my corner gives me stress, so that's why I don't miss.
There you go. Well, that brings me on to another subject that Ed has in his life when we talk about stress and whatnot. One way to eliminate stress is something that Ed has worked on very much, and it's a big part of his life. And why don't you tell us a little bit, Ed, briefly about the difference between, say, the religion and spirituality, because your outlook on this can reduce people's stress tremendously.
Well, a big part of my life is that I lead church services. I average leading 25 church services a year, both for mainline churches and metaphysical churches. And there's a difference between religion and spirituality. Religion has been going downhill for 30 years in the States. I think Canada too. People don't go to churches as much anymore, but spirituality is up. People want spirituality. They want to study all these questions about, well, why am I here? What's my purpose? What are universal laws? This kind of thing. But they don't want it under the rigid umbrella of rules and regulations from churches. So people tend to not want to belong to churches, especially younger people, but they embrace spirituality. So what I do is I go, in addition to my church work, I lecture for study groups around the country that are studying metaphysical ideas. Meta meaning beyond, metaphysical meaning the established precepts. So I'm lecturing for study groups on things like, what is your soul's purpose? Why are you here? How to receive spiritual guidance. What are the universal laws? Universal laws apply to everybody. You don't even have to have a religion. They can be an atheist, but gravity is a universal law. So we're all subject to gravity. So we're all subject to countless universal laws. So I run around the country lecturing on these topics. And what I do is I book my square dances and around the country, and then I backfill in. I look and see, well, here's where I'm going, what study groups are here, and I'll contact them and say, do you want to lecture? And if they say yes, then I go and do my lecture. So this week I'm going on a 1-week calling tour to New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. And in the middle of that, I have a lecture for a group in Wilmington, Delaware. And they've chosen, I have 13 different talks that I give. And they've chosen the topic, the history of the Essenes. And the Essenes were the group that back in the times of Jesus and before Christ, the Essenes were this spiritual group. Jesus was an Essene, Mary was an Essene, Joseph was an Essene, and the Essenes are responsible for the whole Christmas story. And so they want this story, and that's what I give them. So that's what I'm doing. I'm averaging about 20 to 25 lectures a year and 20 to 25 church services a year. All my church sermons are metaphysical. They don't have to do with, what's the history of this group and that group. It's all about metaphysical thought and how you apply this in your everyday life. And so that's a big part of my life now.
Okay. Yeah, that's, I know when I was working in the aerospace business, one of the big things was human factors in resource management, which is like who's responsible for what. And one of the problems when you talk about cockpit resource management is stress and fatigue. It's very important to a pilot whether they're tired or whether they're stressed as to how they operate. And the 200 to 300 people in the back of the plane are all reliant on your stress levels. So I would facetiously say to the group, look, I'm a professional worrier. I will do your worrying for you, because how many times have you had to worry about something and it helped? And you're like, never did help. So I'll worry for you. I'll take that stress away from you. I'll let you know on a weekly basis how you're doing.
I like to watch this program, Air Disasters, about what causes airplane crashes.
Yeah.
And they just had one on about before there was resource management. And there was a crash, I forget when, 78 or 80. And when they did all the investigation of the crash, that's what led to the establishment in the mid-80s of resource management in the cockpit. Yeah. And that greatly reduced the number of crashes.
Yeah.
By the way, did you know that the first airplane hangar was invented in Pittsburgh, where I live?
Oh, Curtis.
Yeah, for people who had drip dry planes.
Oh, drip dry.
The first airplane hangar.
That's okay. Well, of course, you know that a lot of the accidents can be prevented. The saying is that a good landing, for instance, is one that you can walk away from. A better one is, or actually the best landing is when they can use the plane again.
That's true.
So, that particular accident you're talking about, Ed, was a situation, we have it as callers. We can relate it to ourselves. We're so busy trying to find our corner that we miss flow. We have boys backing up on a bend the line, or girls, being overturned 90, 100 degrees. And the thing that happened in the airplane was they had a problem. I think it was with their landing gear, and everybody in the cockpit was so concerned with trying to fix that problem that they didn't realize that they ran out of fuel.
Yeah, right. That was the fuel, right? They ran out of the fuel.
Yeah,
That's right. I tell callers in my clinics, you're not allowed to miss flow. You're just there are certain things you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to miss your corner, and you're not allowed to miss body flow, and because that's part of your job. And it isn't like you're inventing a new rocket or a rocket engine. It's just moving little bodies around. So this is no big deal. But I tell them there's just certain things they're not allowed to do.
Yeah.
I'm big on body flow and calling. Big on body flow. And when there's bad body flow, it just tears me up.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when it's so obvious. So we found out what bugs you about dancers. What about, and probably that would deal with other callers when other callers use bad body flow. Is there anything in particular that bugs you about people in general?
Yeah, people do not laugh at my jokes.
Aha. Was that a joke? No.
No, true.
I see, everybody laughed, so we're not bugging you.
No, I wrote an article for American Square Dance magazine a while back. Things as a dancer, things that I like or dislike about a caller. And that's I try to do those in my caller clinics. And one of the big ones, of course, is bad body flow. But I think there were 15 things in there, something like that.
That's a lot of things to keep track of, Ed.
What's that? Well, I don't have the article memorized. I just have my corner memorized.
Yeah, right.
See, on my screen, you are my corner because you're in the upper left part of the screen. So you're my corner. Well, what a thrill to have you as my corner.
Yeah, right. Oh, Lordy. Well, Did
you call me?
Lord.
Did you call me? You said Lord. I didn't know whether you called me or not.
Yes. Well, that's why I thought my name was Jesus for the longest time.
Right.
Yeah. I'd be sitting on the side of the driveway every day. My dad would come home and say, Jesus, you here again? That was my name. Anyhow, let's get off of that. 1989, National Challenge Convention in Niagara Falls.
Yep.
Okay. And I remember.
I'll never forget Niagara Falls because we went to Niagara Falls and we're there looking at the falls before the convention. We were touring the thing. And standing beside me was a man, and he said, "Don't worry, I'm a plumber. I can fix it."
Oh, jeez.
Go ahead. I interrupted you.
No, that's good. That's good. My father-in-law was a plumber. He never did fix that. Son of a gun.
He was a drip.
Okay, you were showing me around the facility in the hotel.
Yeah.
And the C4 hall had bright, deep red carpeting. And I remember saying something to you about it, saying, well, we won't know when we've made mistakes. The floor is already blood red.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah. Yeah, I got caught up short because Kitchen was getting married there. And
was it there? Was it there when you did the wedding ceremony?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't remember which year.
Yeah, because all of a sudden, someone said to me, "Well, they want to do a square dance wedding here at the convention. Is anybody a minister?" And nobody raised their hands. And someone turned to me and said, "Go study it. You got to do it." So I went back to my room. We got out the Bible. In the back was the words for a wedding ceremony. So I just stuck a bunch of square dance calls into the thing and made up the wedding thing. Something about.
He did a great job. He came out as a suit and everything. He looked like a preacher, and he did this wedding ceremony for him right there in the hall. It was really, there were hundreds of
eyes
people
of God and Cotman alike. Yes. Yeah, that was kind of fun. So, Ed, when we talk about that National Challenge Convention as an event and everything, oh, give us a little history on that, like when it started. What gave you the idea that you could do such a thing and pull it off?
Well, the reason it started was the big regular national convention refused to have any challenge dancing as part of its convention. And I went to my first national in 1965. Not 60, 66 in Indianapolis, and they had no challenge at all. And so 67, the national was in Atlantic City. So I decided, well, we're going to the national, and the challenge dancers would go to the national too, just because there were hardly any big events at all at that time. So they would go along with everyone else. So I said, well, why don't we have an event where we can have challenge after parties? And so I set it up to do that at the George Washington Motel in Valley Forge, and called 5 other callers and said, do you want to do this? And there's no pay. It's just we'll be dancing there from like 11 to 2 every night. So the callers all said fine. And so that's what we did from 11, because I didn't want to interfere. I didn't want to be dancing at the same time as the national and competing with them. So that's why we didn't start till 11 at night. And it went from 11 to 2, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So then the national still refused to have challenge dancing as part of its program. And because the thing at the George Washington Motel was so successful, these after parties were so successful, I said, well, why don't we just do this as a separate event? So 1968, we established it as a separate event. An event was in Columbus, Ohio, and we had 4 callers, including myself, for the staff for that. And I set up the challenge convention initially so I would have some place to dance challenge, because I'm out calling all the time, so I don't have any time to dance it. So this would be a place where I could go and dance challenge. And this ultimately turned into this little joke of, well, I don't have any time to dance at the convention. I'm too busy running it when you got over 1,000 people there. And so I didn't get a chance to dance much subsequently at the challenge convention. And then it just took off from there. It slowly grew, and eventually we wound up with our high point was we had over 1,600 dancers from 37 states and 6 foreign countries for several years, all at the same time at the same convention.
Yeah. Did Marilyn dance challenge?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
She learned the same way as I did. She when we started going together, I had her read the calls a little bit, and then we went out to the most successful club level caller in Pittsburgh, like a plus caller, and we danced to him for 3 and 4 weeks. And so she never took lessons, again, just by exposure, and she adapted real well. And then about the 1st of April, I said, well, now it's time to learn to dance challenge, and we can dance to Pete Heckman. And she got sick with the flu. Well, this was great. Now she could had plenty of time at home to study the calls. She didn't have to go to work. So she studies the calls, and then we start dancing to Pete Heckman. And the goal was, in the middle of April, Lee Cotman was coming into Pittsburgh to call a challenge dance at the end of May. And the goal was to have her be ready to be able to dance at that dance. Not that she would be great, but she could survive it. So she recovered from the flu. We started dancing to Pete Heckman toward the end of April. And a month later, Lee Cotman comes into Pittsburgh, and she's able to handle it. She wasn't a detriment in the square. Obviously, she was not a great dancer, but she didn't make mistakes. She could watch other people and see where to go. And so that was her introduction to challenge. And then she subsequently danced C1. She danced C2 for a while I had my C2 group. And then she subsequently didn't do C2 much. She didn't have her dance at my clubs because too much because that would keep somebody else from dancing. There was a paying person. So eventually she kind of dropped C2, but she can still dance C1. We have a C1 class going, and she'll fill in there, and she remembers the calls from way back, even though she hasn't danced challenge for like 10 years. She can step in and do it because she remembers the calls from back when.
How did you guys meet?
Met at the bank. I was going Mellon Bank in Pittsburgh. I was a trainee going through their different departments. She was working in the claims department, and they would rotate us trainees through the different departments. So I spent 2 weeks or 3 weeks in her department, met her there. That's how we met.
Uh-huh. So if you had a superpower, what superpower
Are
would
you
you
waving at me or leaving? Oh, Wendy was waving.
Oh, Wendy had to go. Okay.
Yeah.
She probably got a dance this afternoon, later today. So yeah, what superpower would you like to have?
Never missing the corner.
Okay.
And having the jokes be so good that everybody laughs every single time.
Is there a costume for that kind of?
No.
No.
I'm dressed in the costume.
The Ed Foote costume. So this Halloween, if I want to go out as Ed Foote, I gotta ask specifically for that costume. Okay.
Well, one time at a Halloween dance, people made me a foot costume.
Oh,
And it was like one of these billboard signs you wear in the front, and on the back, and it was a big, gigantic foot.
oh my. So what would be on your, if you had a tombstone or tombstone, or if somebody were doing a eulogy, what would your eulogy be?
I want people to say he made them happy.
Great, great. Okay, well, I think you have made folks happy today. Showing the other side of the mic, especially, that you have many interests, in that if you want to be, you can still be as busy in this business as you want to be.
That's
You
true.
just have to do it. That's one of my. I only have a couple of catchphrases that I use for anything, and one of them is just do it. And I moved out here to Cochrane 3 years ago, and thinking that I was going to be sort of semi-retired from calling, and now I'm calling, even especially with Zoom. It's really, I don't know if you do much with Zoom, Ed. Have you done much?
I've never called on Zoom. I know several callers have been very successful at that. I just never got involved with that, but it is wonderful. It's wonderful to have that.
Well, like I have even though I'm not going back to Florida this winter, I'm calling in Florida for the Southeast Florida Dancers Association on Zoom in February. I call for Puddletown Squares in Seattle on some Tuesday nights.
Weather's still going. That's amazing.
Yeah. Still going full squares. I have a club starting up in Costa Rica.
Wow.
As well as all the stuff that happens here in little old Alberta. So, if I wanted to, yeah, I could go back to being busy as all get out. But you know what? I'm happy doing what I'm doing so far. Interviewing guys
Great
like
you
Ed.
can do all that.
Well, and and the input and the networking I get from guys like Ed and Hannah and Wendy was on, it's immeasurable. It just helps so much. And I'm working with Hannah. Hannah, you and I, we're going to have a date set up pretty soon. You've been practicing, I hope. Oh, that doesn't look good. Hannah is learning to yodel.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and she can do it. It's just finding the right range and the right songs.
Never been able to do that. It's always fascinating to me.
Well, it's fun. It is, but I can't do it anymore because of my voice. My voice is shot, unfortunately. Well, it's not totally shot, but it's not what it was. That's for sure.
I think you can do it still.
Well, I might if
We can practice together.
I get the right operation. I'm not sure that I want to do that operation though, if you know what I mean. Okay. So, anyhow, thanks Ed for coming on and sharing some of your life with us, some of your stories. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask Ed?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when he began the interview, he said that he was introverted. I cannot believe that he is introverted, because he comes over as very extroverted and very I forgot now what
Charming.
yeah, I mean,
Well,
I just can't believe.
you're not supposed to be introverted when you're having an interview. So
Yeah,
this is the same as calling a dance. When
yeah,
when you're supposed to be extroverted, then I'm extroverted. But I'm not extroverted all the time. So for instance, if somebody invited me to a party, say a cocktail party of 30 or 40 people and everybody's milling around, standing around with a drink and all, I'm not going to be talking much. I'm going to be hanging back and just be an introverted type person in that situation, because I'm not the focus of attention the way I am at a square dance. So if I'm not the focus of attention, as in an interviewer, as the caller, then I'm going to be introverted.
yeah. I can understand that. I call that being the one in the kitchen doing the washing up in a party. Like if you're in a party, I generate to somewhere that I feel comfortable with, that I don't have to talk to people.
It's a learned art.
Right.
How
Right. I had to learn to be extroverted,
yeah, you do.
because
Yeah.
that's the requirement for the job. So if I want to do the job, then I got to meet the requirements.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can't just stand on the stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a workshop. Yeah, I did a workshop once, and I sort of like said that I always would have loved to have been a straight out extrovert rather than introvert. And this lady who was a psychologist, she turned around and she said, think about this. If the whole of the world had extroverts, it would be in a mess. So the world needs introverts to keep the world stable, if you know what I mean. So yeah, so yeah, that's good.
Yeah, you need to keep the world stable so it keep people from horsing around.
Hey,
Yeah.
okay. All righty. Well, this will go out on YouTube sometime this week, and in 2 weeks' time, on October 29th, I have Charlie Petria, who does podcasts like this, interviewing callers, and he's had some very interesting people on, and so it'll be the two interviewers.
Yeah.
It should be interesting. So I'm looking forward to that too. And be good when we see Ed again up here in Canada, if we can get him to get through customs okay.
Yeah. Well, so you're saying, I guess the interview is over, or as the dog said with its tail in its mouth, this is the end?
That's it.
Eva, say hello to Rosie for me. I always give her a call at Christmas time.
Okay, I will not see her for a while. I had a dance this weekend, but I had other things to do at home. So I missed.
Between her C4 and her bridge, she really keeps busy there.
She's building a bridge?
No, she's playing bridge. I do that too.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, guys. Well, Thanks for showing
Thanks for
up.
having me, Joe. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks. We'll talk. I'll be emailing you again shortly with a link to the videos, of course, and we'll go from there. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Very good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Bye.